Colleagues, I'd like to welcome you very much to this side event here. Thank you so much for being here. Side event, Global Good Practices, UN Disability and Development Report 2023, and the Zero Project Policymaker Forum publication, organized by our partners, the Estel Foundation and its Zero Project. Let me stress, maybe at the beginning and at the outset, just that it's a real honor for me personally to work with an Austrian NGO that's not only active here at the UN and the Conference of States Parties, but that has also a reputation for running excellent projects for so many years, and that reputation not only in Austria but internationally recognized by all. And the Zero Project's expertise and experience collected in a database fed into this year's UN Disability and Development Report. So as we look ahead to the SDG Summit in September and the halftime mark for achieving the 2030 agenda, we also have to assess, of course, where we are regarding the rights of persons with disabilities. We had the COVID pandemic. We know that the ongoing situations of conflict worldwide affect persons in vulnerable situations, and that those are left behind. And that's simply unacceptable. This year we celebrate 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 30 years of the Vienna Declaration and Plan of Action. But frankly, celebrations are only in order when persons with disabilities also effectively can enjoy these rights. Austria continues to advocate for accessibility and participation of persons with disabilities in all aspects of life, and therefore I very much welcome today's discussion how to bring the CRPD closer to people's lives and to learn from each other, highlighting good practices from all around the world. I want to hand over right away to Michael Fembeck, CEO of the Zero Project, and who will guide us through this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and not only for this great intro and this great opening words, also for the great support that we receive from the Estel Foundation, from the Zero Project, from you, and from the Permanent Mission. And I also want to point out especially Ms. Julia Eberl, who worked continuously with us since January to make this side event happen. Following up on your words, also pointing out these needs for improvements, these needs for working together, these needs for bringing this to integrate this better into the SDG. I would like to give a little more context on this side event, why we're doing it and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So I think we all agree, and you mentioned this also, Your Excellency, there's a lot to do. This is where I think nobody in the room will contradict. And so to achieve a world with zero barriers, which is our mission of the Estel Foundation, of the Zero Project, is a long way to go. I think nobody will disagree that it's also innovations that can drive the change. I think also nobody will disagree in the room. But then there's definitely a disagreement by definition how to do that. So we all working on innovations, we're all working on scaling and replicating, but we're all using different methods of doing that without ever discussing it. So governments use policies and regulations, startups use technology, but there's a lot more that people are using and working on. So there is strategic litigation, there is training, there is advocacy, there is open source technology, there is membership models, there's a lot out there. And so in other words, this also means a lot of methods are out there that are not really useful. There are other models that are better than the existing ones, that's by definition. And there is no real agreement and also no real research out about the models that should be used to scale and to replicate. So, and this is why we're creating these sessions. We as the Zero Project, we have a defined model. We don't say that it's the best one, but we have one. And the one is we're looking at innovations, we research innovations, we showcase them, we organize a conference around innovations, and we try to bring ecosystems of people around innovations that work together with those innovations to bring them to scale it happens and it does, but that's our method. Actually, we also don't have a proof if this is the best method of how to do it. So, and this session is about one of the aspects and one of the dimensions of how to scale and replicate. It's mostly on good practices and good policies. I'm now coming more to the details of these sessions. There are two publications that we put in the middle of this side event. One is the UN Disability and Development Report, will be presented by Maria Martinho, who is the editor-in-chief or the lead author of it, and it's a forthcoming publication, and this is about what I just mentioned. The implicit belief is putting out research, putting out model policies, defining the progress on SDG creates change because people use this and improve their own methods. We as the Zero Project, we did something similar. We brought together for the last Zero Project conference a Policymaker forum where 9 model policies were presented. We produced a publication that's, if you sit in the first row, is in front of you. If you're sitting in second row, there are still a few copies on your way out. And we also believe that there's a power of looking at those innovations, looking at these descriptions of existing innovative policies, and then learning from this. So this is our belief, and this is why we brought this session together also to present these publications. We have 2 more interventions after Maria from UNDESR, 3 people that have contributed to this Policymaker forum and whose policies are covered in the report. We have Jolson Diaz, who is a human rights lawyer, who will talk about the importance of coherent laws and regulations. And we have another aspect, wrapping up the policy approach, which is the practice approach. So Connie van der Rakis, who represents the civil society and NGOs, and also their belief how to create change by creating models, and what her experience is from the practice and from the NGO side. So this is what we're up to. This is what we want to do together. Just some housekeeping issues before I then hand over to you, Maria. So the session is on webcast. This means it's also broadcasted live. People are watching us online right now, and it's also then available after this session on the side event part of COSP16. You can also watch it and share it afterwards, and it also will be available via the Zero Project website. There is captioning available on the online site, and there's also signed language available. It should be also in the room. I hope it comes in the next minutes. I asked all the participants and all the co-presenters to be on time, so it should be interventions of some 5-6 minutes, so that we also have ample time for discussion and sharing at the end in the second part of these presentations. So I'm done now talking. I'm handing over you to Maria Martinho, is working for UNDESR, the DSID, and is presenting now giving us a preview of the UN Disability and Development Report 2023. So now over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Michael. Your Excellency, Ambassador Marshek, colleagues, good afternoon. And first of all, let me welcome you for being here at this side event at the first day of the COSP. It is a pleasure to speak here at this event, and I would like to thank you, the Permanent Mission of Austria to the UN and the Zero Project, for organizing this event on this important topic. Good practices, in fact, inspire all of us to move forward to a more inclusive and accessible world. I'm not sure how to put my slides on, but I'm sure Michael can maybe help me. Yes.
Sorry.
So I will talk, as Michael mentioned, about the UN Disability and Development Report. DESA has, as part of its mandate, the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs for everyone, including persons with disabilities, and in line with the Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities, and the UN Disability and Development Report is part of this work. So this report was requested by the UN General Assembly with two aims. First, compile and analyze policies, best practices, and statistics, and to reflect on progress made towards the SDGs for persons with disabilities and towards the realization of the convention. Next, please. So the first report was released in 2018. This was the first publication at the global level on disability and the SDGs. And the report found that persons with disabilities are at a disadvantage regarding most SDG targets. Next. So that report made an extensive compilation of available data at the time on persons with disabilities. And this was used also to provide an evidence base to allow us to evaluate progress over time for persons with disabilities regarding the SDGs. So, for example, the report found that in 2017, only 41% of countries had materials to support students with disabilities in school. And so knowing this in 2017 allow us to go over time and see, well, have we made progress now in 2023 or not? Next. So we also looked at good practices, and the report provided good practices to realize the SDGs. And in that regard, we collaborated with the Zero Project, which I guess you were suspecting, given the introduction of Michael and how our works intersect. So they did provide us several examples, and the report did cover inputs that were provided by the Zero Project on good practices on inclusive political participation, inclusive initiatives in post-disaster reconstruction, in access to justice for persons with disabilities, in accessibility, and in inclusive education. So, for example, one good practice that we showcased in the report was the launch of a questionnaire in European countries to rate the accessibility of public places. And you can see my slide has a picture of a person with of a user with a wheelchair that is going through a passage that is large enough to allow the wheelchair to go through. Next. So in the 2023 report, we are doing the same work. So this will be an update of the 2018 report so that we know what happened in the last 5 years. Are we better or not? So the report focuses on almost all SDGs. So focusing in detail in 14 SDGs, which is all the Sustainable Development Goals except 2 goals that are purely environmental. Next. And so the report is a collaboration of a large number of people and experts. There are more than 200 people involved in the production of the report. A big part of the experts comes from UN entities and international financial institutions, but we also have experts from non-governmental organizations, including organizations of persons with disabilities, from academia, research institutes, non-profits, private sector, foundations, partnerships, as well as country experts and governmental officials. So again, we use sources of evidence, and this time we went a little bit further and we asked the Zero Project to help us a bit more than even last time. So they provided a very nice analysis for us of good practices categorized by SDG, so that we could feed it directly into the chapters of the report. But we also used good practices coming from UN entities and also other experts. And so in this slide, you see an image of a person with disability working in a metal factory, and some of the good practices that we feature in the report are about initiatives made by countries at the country level to promote more work for persons with disabilities. So we also use a large number of data sets. I'm not going to name them all in the interest of time, but some of them are from UN entities, some of them are in the hands of other organizations and in the private sector. There has been a large increase of data in the last years on persons with disabilities, which is really good news. So this report uses both official data, but it also uses what we usually call the big data. So we use data from crowdsourced information that we get from applications from smartphones on accessibility, for example, to know how many schools are accessible worldwide, how many banks are accessible worldwide, how many restaurants are accessible worldwide. We also tackle data on social media. So, for example, we use data from LinkedIn to have an idea of the extent to which women with disabilities are represented in the leadership of organizations and companies working on disability. So as I have said before, we have much more data than in 2018, which allows us to assess progress over time, to make more regional breakdowns, to know what's happening, in different regions of the world. We are tackling some topics for the first time that we could not cover last time. So, for example, we analyzed the participation of persons with disabilities in online work, which is a topic that has been becoming increasingly important since the COVID-19 pandemic. We also, for the first time, have data on international cooperation and to which extent aid is inclusive or not of persons with disabilities. So the report will allow the international community to be more confident where we are regarding the implementation of the convention as well as the SDGs, and also what we need to do from now till 2030 to realize the SDGs for persons with disabilities. So this is my last slide. This is a link to the 2018 report, and this will also be the web page where we will post the 2023 report. It should come this summer at some point. The date is not yet confirmed, but stay tuned. Look at the website, and if you'd like to share your feedback, we would like always to hear from everyone to improve further in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Before I'm handing over to Immaculada, you also did the 2080 report. In very brief, has there been progress in the implementation of the CRPD and towards the SDG, or?
From now in 2023?
Yeah, in the past 5 years.
Okay, so I don't have the finalized report, but I can talk about preliminary results that we have. So what we see is that there has been some progress, but the progress has been too slow. So with the current rate of progress, we are not going to achieve the SDGs for persons with disabilities in 2030. So we are expecting the report to make a call for an acceleration of the efforts to include persons with disabilities so that the goals actually can be within our reach. At this point, at the current rates, they are not, unfortunately.
Thank you, Maria, also for this preview of the hopefully the time for discussion that we're having at the end of the presentation part. So we are moving now over to a current Zero Project publication actually to be presented today. It's this model policy report. As mentioned, some of you have it in front of you, some don't, and it's online also on the Zero Project website, so it's an accessible PDF version that you can also look at online as of today. This model policy report consists of 3 types of model policies. One is country has developed something and are quite confident and proud that this is something other countries should also look like. Dan Rochal from the government of Israel will present one of those. The second one are United Nations entities and agencies. They produce something for countries to use and a kind of model. There's in the report you will find one on e-health from WHO and ITU and on health in general from WHO Europe. And there's a third type, which is Immaculada from the European Commission is going to present to us right now. It's a framework, a European Union guideline that's mandatory, but only when it's implemented, and it must be implemented on the country level. It's the European Accessibility Act. It's the big thing in Europe now when it comes to accessibility. So, Immaculada Plasencia Borrero, consultant to the European Commission, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, Michael, to present the European Accessibility Act to this distinguished and expert audience and participants today. The European Accessibility Act is a piece of legislation, a piece of European legislation on accessibility that has a focus on the area of ICT. Its implementation, can I have the next slide? Its implementation is an integral part of the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities, as accessibility is its first priority area and presents accessibility as an enabler of rights, autonomy, and equality. In the next slide, you will see that in the European Union, we have worked hard to have a comprehensive ecosystem of accessibility legislation. We have legislation that deals, for example, with transport or with lifts, web accessibility legislation, but we have also horizontal accessibility, and the Accessibility Act is one of those legal acts that contains quite a number of products and services in its scope. We also have legislation that is related to funding on accessibility. For example, requiring to purchase public authorities to procure accessible products, services, infrastructure, or when we use the EU funds, that those funds respect accessibility. Now, let me focus on the Accessibility Act as a horizontal piece of legislation. In the next slide, it shows what is covered, and it has two main components. First, we have selected a number of products and services, and those have to be accessible before they are placed into the market. They have to comply with the accessibility requirements. On the second leg of the legislation, what we do is we take exactly those requirements and we use them in the context of public procurement, EU funds, or other EU law that only says requires accessibility without going into detail. And what we say is that by applying the accessibility requirements in the Accessibility Act, they will get presumption of compliance with the general obligation of accessibility. In addition, we have two small but important areas. One is, for the first time, we are requiring that the answering to the European emergency number 112 has also to happen in accessible formats. Public authorities have to respond in accessible way. And we have also some requirements for accessibility of the built environment that member states can adhere to. Let me share with you in the next slide the services that we are talking about covered in the Act. So it's telecommunication services called electronic communications, services providing access to audiovisual media services, certain elements of rail of transport modes, because we already have some focus sector legislation in transport. So we are covering now websites, mobile device-based services, real-time information, tickets, electronic ticketing, and so forth. We also have covered the area of consumer banking services, e-books and the dedicated software, and e-commerce. All e-commerce websites in Europe will have to be accessible. In relation to products, what we are covering is computers and operating systems, self-service terminals, and in particular, in the next slide, sorry, in particular, all payment terminals and terminals that provide access to the services that I just mentioned, whether it's ATMs, ticketing machines, check-in machines, they will have to be accessible. We also have computers and technology, so terminal equipment basically, used in telecommunications and used in audiovisual media services. And finally, we have dedicated e-readers. They will have to be accessible. Now, I will just give you a flavor of the key provisions. First, we have accessibility obligations. As I said, they have to be complied with before placing products and services in the market. When they do so, those products can freely circulate in Europe and services. We have obligations for each economic operator involved: manufacturers, importers, distributors, service providers. The products will get a CE marking, and the services will explain in the conditions and terms what the accessibility they comply with. We can use the standards, and we have, in the next slide, just to flavor a strong enforcement procedure. First, we start with self-declaration. We have checks by public authorities, and finally, we have got the possibility to go to court by consumers, persons with disabilities, but also their associations. Very quick, just in the next slides, I will not go into detail, but in the annex is where the requirements, the accessibility requirements are there. And just to finish, let me share with you in the next slide that we have got a standardization process ongoing. We are revising 3 existing European standards in the area of ICT, in the area of design for all, and in the area of the built environment. And we are requiring 3 new standards, one on emergency services accessibility, 112, support services, and non-digital information. We hope that this will facilitate the implementation of accessibility. And with this one, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Immaculada, also for your time efficiency in presenting such a comprehensive piece of legislation in some 5 minutes. In a case of unwanted serendipity, Immaculada is also speaking at a parallel side event of the ITU, so she has to leave us right after this presentation. But may I ask you one question also in the light of how to create change using policies? You pointed out already enforcement measurements, you pointed out standardization as a tool that is used. How about training of people, of stakeholders? Because if nobody's aware of this, it will not happen. So what is planned on the training and other implementation measures that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. It's a very important question. Very important question because any legislation without the competent people to implement it will not take effect. And we have realized that in the area of accessibility, we need to work more and more into training industry, private sector to implement accessibility. They are the addressees of this act, but also the public sector, because they are going to be checking compliance. So we need to have really an investment on that. And we have done so. Last December, we launched a center called Accessible EU. And it's a contract service for the European Commission in which we are going to have over 80 trainings. We are going to have events at national level in the different member states. The idea is to raise awareness, to create competence, and to create ultimately a community in Europe of competent experts on accessibility from different perspectives, technical, legislative, policy, so that at the end, accessibility can really become a reality. So the center, we are going to launch, to have a launching event on the 4th of July in Brussels. You are all welcome. And yes, we are looking excited to this new initiative that will really help Europe to become more accessible. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And a closing question
yes.
before you leave.
Yes, sure.
So for those people who are not so familiar with the European Union system, so what you have built with the Commission and on a European Union level is a directive. Huh?
Correct.
And the directive is not a national law in Austria and all the other
not
countries,
yet.
But it's mandatory to implement a law that's based
yes.
on this directive. No?
Yes.
That's the way this works. No?
Indeed. So basically in Europe you have different typology of legislation. Some are of direct effect in the member states. This one is needs to be transposed, as we call it, into national law. So basically, member states need to write national laws that state what we have at European level, and the application date of these national laws is set to be 28th of June, 2025. Mm-hmm. So by then, only these products in the list and services in the list could be placed in the European market in all the member states only when they are accessible. And we know that member states are working hard. We know that there is a little bit delay in most member states, but we work together with them to facilitate the implementation. Of course, we also do checks on those legislations because they have to be correct. They have to comply with EU law in order to ensure that we have a uniform market of accessible products and services. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now over to Dan Rochal. Dan Rochal, he's the Commissioner for Equal Rights for People with Disabilities, working for the Ministry of Justice and the Government of Israel. He's presenting actually, it's also not a straightforward law. It's an existing law that exists for some time, but it's an amendment to this law that has been done recently. And Dan, over to you. Please give us the details of this new piece of legislation from Israel.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. And the slides. Thank you. So basically, like you said, we're talking about an existing legislation that after quite a few years of realizing the lack of effectiveness and the lack of results of this legislation, we had to perform an amendment to pass an amendment to the law with the hope, the strong hope that it will do what is necessary in terms of enforcement of accessibility in Israel. So we can begin. So our commission, we are the regular responsible for enforcing all rights of people with disabilities. More specifically, we are regulators in the field of accessibility, discrimination, and employment. In our hat, we provide all legal support and resources to help overcome obstacles of varying kinds in all areas, but mainly in the 3 areas that we are regulators on. And specifically in the area of accessibility, we ensure that all public places, facilities, and services are indeed accessible or on the way to become accessible. Go on. And we have our authority, we have our power by the law that was enacted initially in 1998 with the aim to promote and protect all rights of people with disabilities. This law from 1998 gives us our authority, our powers, and our enforcement tools. And obviously the vision, the purpose is to ensure that people with disabilities have the opportunity to integrate and to be included in society and all parts of society in all aspects, and specifically to ensure the right to participate in all aspects of society. Now, when it was initially legislated, there were some, the law gave us a few enforcement tools of all kinds, basically, civil, administrative, and criminal. And each kind of tool in relation to a specific right and specific aspects of the law. Please continue. And the tools we were given are indeed effective to an extent. In some cases, a great extent. Some cases, less so. But when it comes to accessibility, the powers we had before the amendment was that all violators of accessibility provisions received warrants that had them have to fix the violation within reasonable timeframes. Whereas if a violation is not fixed during that time frame, a sort of criminal procedures would be initiated. Now, criminal procedures sounds scary and harsh, but unfortunately, in fact, it was not more than a theoretical, I guess, paper, a theoretical status of being criminally charged without real sanction, because no real case got to be decided, in a way that would be substantial enough, in a way that would be a large enough statement for it to be fixed. And again, if a violation would have been fixed, there would be no financial penalty or any other real penalty, for that matter, for all the time frame and all the years before that where it was not fixed. Go on, please. And obviously this had its shortcomings, major shortcomings, lack of any effective enforcement in reality. There was no sufficient incentive or motivation for any violators to really fix what needed to be fixed and do the right, take the right steps to become accessible. It was basically inadequate. There was inadequate balance between the theoretically powerful criminal enforcement tools and the violations themselves. This led to in practice, ineffective enforcement. So then there came our 23rd Amendment to the law, which was passed in our parliament, in our Knesset, this past summer, last July, with the aim to provide more effective and much more proportionate administrative rather than criminal enforcement tools with 3 different type of measures. I guess the most harsh, the strongest measure is our financial sanctions, financial fines that would be given for lack of continuous accessibility. A less harsh or a little weaker sanction would be just administrative warnings that could potentially lead to fines at a later stage, but at the initial stage, just a warning. And the third one is sort of an in-between measure, which would be the option to take on obligation to fix a violation, thereby avoiding further penalties by depositing sort of a financial collateral, a money collateral. And whereas the higher the level of compliance with the regulations, the more considerate the punishment, the measure that would be taken against that specific violator. And also, naturally, the more severe and the more visible and the more I guess disturbing the violation is, the harsher the measure that would be taken, and also in accordance to the type of violator. For example, if it is a large entity, like I don't know, just a bank, the measure that would be taken would be harsher than say a small cafe, even if the violation would be similar. Go on. Now, the process of passing and implementing this new amendment, the new amendment to the law, that we had to overcome many objections from all sectors, public sector, business sector. Obviously, they didn't like even the idea that they would have to pay out of pocket for not being accessible. And so in this regard, we had to bring on 2 important additional parameters into the consideration and into the amendment. One is the theoretical or practical economic capacity of the obligees. Again, the example of a large bank or a large, I guess, chain of stores versus a small neighborhood business. And the fact that if an entity would rely on specific, what we call accessibility experts, these are professionals that advise on accessibility, then we could, in a way, forgive them to an extent for being inaccessible, and in those cases, the sanction would also be weaker and more considerate. And also, obviously, we had to take actions on our part, be proactive to increase the understanding of potential obligees of their obligation, which includes a large public campaign that includes all media tools and all media channels. And we also, in order to help, our ultimate goal is not to fine businesses, not to punish businesses, but to have an accessible environment. So we see it as our responsibility to help places become accessible, and one of the ways is developing tools, many cases technological tools, to show entities, to show businesses what they have to do in order to get it right. For example, a phone app with which a business could use to examine themselves and see how accessible they are, and comply with that app that will bring them to to proper accessibility. And the implementation of this new amendment is actually starting right now in like a couple of weeks, and we are very curious, very anxious to see how it's going to work, whether it will bring about the necessary change, the necessary result. So that's basically it.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Michael.
So in this case, and Dan, correct me if I'm putting this in the wrong words, it was about fine-tuning the sanctions mechanism for not obliging the accessibility. Existing regulation, the regulations themselves were not changed. It was only the sanctions or the punishments that were changed. No? Is that correct? Or?
Well, yes, the accessibility requirements and provisions, they have not changed at all, not even one bit. It was a matter of how enforcing them and how making them work and how letting them actually, be dominant and not just on paper.
Just one more question, then we'll hand over. You mentioned, of course, that especially the business sector is specifically happy with that because it's mostly about them, and for them there's not a lot of positive incentives because they are obviously more prone to pay or fines. And so, were there some arguments that also the business sector said accepted and said, okay, let's follow this one because this is good, and or were they simply forced to do that?
Well, the process of legislating in Israel includes hearing the public, in that case businesses, but by the way, it's not only businesses, also government entities. Government entities as well go under this new amendment. But to your question, so the process includes the parliament hearing all those, I guess, all those players, all those, I guess, crowds that would be affected by it, which made passing of the amendment so much more difficult, so much more challenging. But I think, in the greater time frame, it is the right process because, we want to hear everyone before a bill becomes a law. We want to hear objections to make sure that we're doing it the right way and we are being considerate enough and don't think that we have all the knowledge and that we know everything. If you want a corporation, if you want this to work, we need to hear, other views in order to fine-tune, like you said, the end result of the requirement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dan. I hope we have time then to follow up and in a more in-depth discussion of this really interesting piece of amendment. All of that as mentioned are these two that you just heard, and 7 others are part of this publication. Unfortunately, the speaker of Chile from Senadis, the Servicio Nacional de la Discapacidad, cannot be with us today, but as mentioned, they're all in this publication. So we're following up now with Jolson Diaz. Jolson Diaz is an advocate working for Barbosa Diaz Advogados Asociados. I think I've got this all wrong in Portuguese, but
it's quite good.
You will pronounce it right.
Quite good, perfect.
And he's also a member of the National Commission for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Brazil, and he will give us more a meta view on the importance of coherent policies. So over to you, Jolson.
Yes, I first want to describe myself to facilitate accessibility for people with visual impairment. I have light skin, black hair, have a beard, wear glasses, a blue shirt, lilac tie, and a dark jacket. First of all, I want to thank Maria Martinho and Michael Fambeck for the gift they gave us of the UNDESA and the Zero Project of SL Foundation with the opportunity to get together in this very important event. A word of thanks also to Ana Luisa Junqueira, who wrote with me the article that appears in the publication in the Zero Project, that Zero Project has just released, Model Policy Report. In support of national efforts to achieve its goals, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, highlights the importance of international cooperation among countries and partnerships with international organizations and civil society, particularly with disability-related entities. Among other measures, the UN Convention provides for support to capacity building, including the sharing of information, experiences, training program, and best practices. On this regard, two important notes. First, the 2023 SDG Summit that will be convened next September during the United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week to carry out a comprehensive review of the state of the SDGs. And second, the UN Disability and Development Report 2023, to be published soon, updated its SDG good practices matrix with the help of the Zero Project database of good practices from around the world in the implementation of the UNCRPD. Having said that, it is important to emphasize that the UNCRPD is an important international treaty that outlines the rights and principles for promoting and safeguarding the rights of persons with disability. However, the successful implementation of the convention goes beyond its mere ratification by member states. Policy coherence, which involves aligning and coordinating policies across various sectors and levels of governance, plays a crucial role in ensuring the effective realization of disability rights. By fostering consistency, integration, and cooperation among different policy areas, such as political participation, education, and employment, policy coherence acts as a key mechanism for promoting inclusion, equal opportunities, and the full participation of this social segment in all aspects of society. When states ratify international treaties and conventions, they commit to align their laws, policies, and practices with the established standards. This commitment serves as a catalyst for policy coherence efforts, compelling states to review and adjust their existing legislation and governmental frameworks to ensure compliance with treaty obligations. Additionally, ratification creates a platform for dialogue and collaboration among states, facilitating the exchange of knowledge, experiences, and enables states to identify areas where further efforts are needed. In the context of the UNCRPD, policy coherence is essential for its effective implementation. It requires aligning and integrating various policies across sectors, economic, social, cultural, and political, to ensure they work together towards the inclusion of persons with disability. This approach is closely linked to intersectionality, which acknowledges that people with disabilities can face multiple forms of marginalization and discrimination based on intersecting factors such as gender, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. Also, by prioritizing policy coherence, conflicts, contradictions, and gaps within disability-related policies can be avoided, fostering a comprehensive and coordinated approach to promoting rights. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, specifically Goal 17, recognizes the need to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. It includes institutional and policy coherence as an integral part of the means of implementation. The agenda also includes a cross-cutting target to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development, which applies to the entire framework of SDGs. This model provides guidance to governments and stakeholders on improving policy and institutional coherence, as well as integrated approaches to policy making for the pursuit of sustainable development goals. It is important to highlight that disability is referenced in various parts of the SDGs, particularly in areas related to education, growth and development, and employment. inequality, accessibility of human settlements, as well as data collection and monitoring of the SDGs. Starting to conclude, I would suggest that policy coherence depends on strong leadership and explicit commitment at the highest political level. These factors are crucial in guiding policy development within line ministries and translating commitments into tangible and measurable actions at the local, regional, national, and international levels. Political leadership at the highest level is also vital for maintaining a delicate balance between complex political, social, and economic factors when adopting cross-sectorial recovery measures, while ensuring the fulfillment of domestic priorities and international obligations, particularly regarding the UNCRPD. In this regard, empowering civil society organizations to develop political leaders is essential for the effective implementation of the UNCRPD through coherent policies. By fostering the growth of leaders within these organizations, we create a platform for their active participation and advocacy in shaping coherent policies that addresses the specific needs and concerns of persons with disability. Thank you.
Jolson, one question regards the bringing this to practice, what you just told us. I think nobody would disagree about the importance of aligning and coherence, but based on your vast experience in these matters, how can you organize this, especially looking also at Nothing About Us Without Us? Could you give some recommendations on how to start this or this aligning and coherence processes?
Basically following what the convention says and SDGs as well. Raising awareness, this is the very first important issue I believe we have to take care of. Funding is also very important because you have to make persons with disabilities and their organizations capable of acting in all of these purposes, and also building institutional capacity, which means training, and as you, Michael, yourself has been emphasizing all the time, investment in research. Mm-hmm. That's what I believe would be a good start to get this thing, at least as a start, to get this thing done. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolson. We now switch perspectives a little bit of until this moment we're more focused on public policies, on legislations and changing the rights and lives of people with disability more from the top-down public policy side. We are now moving to the NGO and to the advocate side, and would like to introduce you, for those who don't know her, Connie Vandarakis, who is a disability consultant, Associate Education Director of DIY, Danceability International, and based in the United States. And she will present us a model policy on a quite specific topic, which you're going to present to us. And again, we focus on how to bring such an existing model to scale, how others can learn and how this can be shared. Connie, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. Before I begin, I encourage you to take a deep breath. I have no slides, so you can look around the room, catch someone's eyes, and offer them a smile before I begin.
Well done.
And I'm so happy I get to follow you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Connie Vandarakis. My pronouns are she and her. I am a middle-aged white woman with white-gray hair pulled back in a ponytail with blue framed glasses, big Zero Project green earrings, and a blue dress. I'm speaking today specifically on the topic of sexual health and reproductive rights for persons with disabilities, grounding myself in the U.S. Secretariat published midterm paper of March 2023 entitled Ensuring Equal Access to and Accessibility of Sexual Health and Reproductive Health Services for Persons with Disability, that was prepared for the focus discussion at this year's conference around this theme. Article 25 and Article 23 of the CRPD with subsections 9 and 22 are the focus of the midterm for reflection and analysis. With those insights in mind, let's talk about the learnings from our Zero Project Award winners in the area of sexual health and reproductive rights. So a little bit of history first. In the development of sexual health and reproductive rights at Zero Project, after reading many Zero Project yearbooks and almanacs, yes, Michael, I do read those, they appeared only a few who had direct sexual health and reproductive rights in mission statements or project in 2019. Down Colombia, Enosh, the Israeli Mental Health Association, and the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice in the United States. All three recipients were Zero Project Award and Impact Transfer recipients, and all three organizations worked in the area of intellectual and psychosocial disabilities. However, we see a shift in 2022 and 2023, and we begin seeing more front-facing organizations applying for the Zero Project Awards, where sexual health and reproductive rights are in the forefront of these organizations' mission and vision. In both years, I moderated panels on sexual health and reproductive rights, mentoring our panelists and that were invited to speak. The entitled sessions were Let's Talk About Sex and Let's Talk About Sex and Disability. Our award recipients come from 10 different countries, specifically Austria, Belgium, Cameroon, Colombia, Israel, Singapore, Vietnam, Cape Town, South Africa, and various groups from the United States. All their work involves bringing awareness to the topic and having a variety of programs to create impact. Some organizations work specifically with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, while others are encompassing all disabilities. These organizations centered their work in the following ways and have overlapping themes: targeted education and training trainer programs. 2, self-advocacy, consent, and empowerment areas. 3, healing, trauma of sexual abuse and violence programs. 4, building bridges and programs with healthcare, government, criminal justice, and legal systems. And 5, all these organizations have goals of breaking ableist structures of sexual health and reproductive rights for disabilities. So what have we learned and the takeaways from these 10 different organizations? First, education is key. Most of the organizations have an educational component. It is essential in these models to have an educational component to bring awareness, understanding, build allies, and partnerships. Community education practice in small communities build clusters of larger groups with the same values and understandings. These models can be replicated in different areas of a country. It's important to build relationships and with related businesses and organizations. Educating staff and employees that work with people with disabilities related to sexual health and reproductive rights is essential to building capacity. I'm going to throw out a quote from our friend Jonathan J. Kaufman, who says, "Disability is the essence of diversity. It runs across race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic orientation, and is the only minority group anyone can join at any time." This moves me to my second and third point. And the second point we've learned from these groups is we must move beyond the binary of gender in policy and practice. Much of the language in the CRPD and other international language groups, gender binary is the norm, just men and women. It also further breaks down age in women, mentioning women and girls. As we know from research, boys who experience sexual assault and trauma is underreported compared to girls for various reasons. So using the word children to replace just girls is recommended. We also moved to include the LGBTQIA communities, which are a part of the United Nations protected groups and a part of the disability community. I suggest that we open our language to use women, men, children, and all individuals that identify as part of the LGBTQIA communities when speaking about persons with disability in sexual health and reproductive rights. 3, we need more qualitative and quantitative data. I've heard that over and over again today. In telling our stories on sexual health and reproductive rights, we must use both qualitative and quantitative data. While certain aspects of data are a challenge to obtain, we must strive to gather data for our communities that we ensure to show impact. Sexual assault and violence is often underreported by people with disability communities, regardless of gender identity. In addition, there is an underreporting of marginalized groups of people. Those include oppressed communities, immigrants, refugees, people of color, disability, LGBTQIA, and the poor communities, or low-wealth communities. Knowing that these pluralistic identities alongside disability must be a part of our storytelling to have an effective impact. And lastly, I leave you with our last recommendation, which is to build bridges between healthcare systems, criminal justice, and local governments. We need to educate those in healthcare systems, criminal justice, government that hold power in policy and funding. As we educate leaders and staff in the social model of disability, we are then building bridges between the medical model of disability and the social model of disability to create more equitable policies, break ableist structures, and create sustainable funding for programming, education, and services for all in sexual health and reproductive rights. These are just a few of the takeaways that I want to share with you, so thank you for your time.
Thank you, Connie, also for pointing out some parts of the spectrum of how to increase and how to scale practices and policies that have not been mentioned so far. So improving the language is definitely important, also in areas where it's not so obvious with people with disabilities. We all know that, but you pointed out some more like gender-related terminology, and also the importance not only of data, but also of data that's relevant for underrepresented groups or double discriminated groups. So I think that's definitely also important as instruments how to bring good practices and policies to scale. So we were 2 people down from the initial panel. We are now 1 person up again from the initial panel. So this is Robin Tim Weiss from the Zero Project team, and he gives us a kind of the making of the Zero Project policy report and how we are working as the Zero Project with policies in that regard. Over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Michael. Now everyone finds out how this piece of sausage was made. So happy to delve into the background, what led to the Zero Project Model Policy Report. My name is Robin Tim Weiss, and I'm the Director of International Affairs at the Zero Project. And for those of you who can hear me, but perhaps not see me, I'm a white male in his early 30s with a short cropped beard, receding hairline, because that's what happens when you grow old, wearing a pinstripe suit, dark green tie, and a blue dress shirt, and smiling because you're all here, and you're all here to specifically hear about inclusive legislation. So, as Michael Fembeck, our CEO, mentioned, how did this come together? Why are we sitting here today holding up this model policy report? And you've heard of what's included in it, amongst others. But I think our model policy report really speaks to 2 key goals at the Zero Project. One is Article 32 of the UN CRPD, in short, international cooperation and how can we ensure that we successfully adopt and live up to the CRPD. The second point is SDG 17, because the CRPD by itself will not lead to success. We need to link it to the Sustainable Development Goals if we want to get somewhere. So therefore, SDG 17 specifically, the idea of strengthening the means of implementation and revitalizing global partnerships is one which is very important to us. Now, public policies, as all of you know, are not flawless. But the written word has power, and if you didn't believe in that, you wouldn't be here, and none of us would be here. Because the CRPD, at the end of the day, piece of paper and text on it. But it has power, and we believe in that power. And I'll give you an anecdote. We started with the Zero Project Policymaker Forum at the Zero Project Conference 2023. We had some fantastic speakers such as Commissioner Dan Rochelle with us and others on the ground. And after the event, and I won't give any names, but I overheard an anecdote of two governments, one government representative talking in their team amongst each other and said, can you believe, this policy, it's really interesting how they're going about and doing this. We should consider taking that up. And it's exactly this principle of let's not reinvent the wheel. Governments around the world are facing budget cuts, are facing to have to do more work with less resources. So why put valuable resources into something if inclusive legislation has been applied elsewhere, and if it can be universally applied, if it can be replicated? And that's really what we wanted to do with this model policy report. And it specifically comes from a vantage point of something which we launched last year as well, which is the Zero Project Ambassador Circle. So it's this idea within the diplomatic world, they're great collectives. Collectives when it comes to gender representation, collectives when it comes to LGBTQ representation, and these are fantastic representations, and we need them, much like Connie van der Rakes just mentioned before. However, have you seen a lot of disability representations? Groups of diplomats elevating the importance of disability? Ambassadors themselves perhaps disclosing disability? Not so much. And we said, let's change that. Let's bring together a collective of political ambassadors, in this case, political ambassadors to the Republic of Austria, and let's pick them up wherever they are on the disability inclusion journey. Some might be neophytes and some might be experts, but they all have a role to play because they're representing their countries. And I'll keep it short, and I'd like to end on something which I personally believe, and I think the Zero Project through the Model Policy Report also believes, which is this concept of soft power. So for the political scientists among you in the room, soft power rings a bell, probably undergraduate course in university, Joseph Nye, 1990s. So this idea and the definition, what is soft power? It is essentially shaping the preferences of others through appeal and attraction. So the idea, Hollywood, Coca-Cola, that drives people to perhaps not necessarily think like Americans, but kind of buy into what the United States has to offer through soft power, through appeal, through attraction. And I believe that the leading powers of the 21st century moving forward will be those who inherently believe in disability inclusion, who believe in disability inclusion to be part of their foreign ministry. And that's going to be a brand, that's going to be a reputation, that's going to be an appeal to say everyone is welcome. We're all going to acquire disability in our lifetime. And we are resilient societies, societies that can deal with natural disasters, societies that can allow tourism fall, societies which you want to be part of and in which everyone is dignified and everyone is appreciated. And I think this is a very small and humble start to that journey to say, look, there are some countries here in international organizations which are going forward with smart, inclusive legislation. Perhaps you want to take a piece of that. Perhaps you want to replicate that and be part of that cool club of countries which inherently believe in disability inclusion and which will be the soft powers of tomorrow. So with that, to make a very long story short, Zero Project Ambassador Circle helped initiate this. I hope you enjoy the publication, and I hope you go back and also bring to our attention inclusive policies within your communities, within your cities, within your municipalities, within your governments, because we want to grow this. We want this to be a thick encyclopedia. So approach us, give us your input, and we thank you for your presence here today.
Thank you, fellow panelists, and also for your time discipline. So we actually got really time for one or even two very short questions with short answers, so you can address the people who are still in the room. You can also ask a more general question, and I will try to find people who can give you an answer to that. Francis.
I have a question for Dan. So we noticed that Israel as a country for the past, a few years has really encouraged a lot of innovation in the digital accessibility space, and actually have exported a lot of technology into United States. So is there a kind of intent at the government policy level to really encourage the accessibility, digital inclusion as one of the strategic focus, and therefore resulted in some of these innovation?
All Israeli government agencies like to encourage development, not only R&D, but also implementation and the use of digital services, digital ingenuity. Though the basic policy, as much as we know about Israeli government, is that they like to let the private sector do the development, the innovation, the R&D, and the government can come and help and support in several ways, one of which is obviously financial. Another way of support is legally support by passing law, by amending existing laws. But there is the basic belief of Israeli government is that some things are done faster, in a more creative and in a more efficient ways by the private sector, by the business sector. And sometimes, the government does enough by not intervening, not interfering, and posing resources and other ways of backing that up legally and as far as policy. And I think as far as innovations in the field of rights for people with disabilities is one of the areas that does that. We at the Commission, we encourage all innovations, especially technological innovations. We are backed by the Ministry of Justice that we are part of. I happen to personally and professionally believe that some things are done more efficiently and more creatively also by the private sector, by the business sector. And as you mentioned, the Israeli business sector is known for its creativity as far as innovations and technology.
Thank you so much, Dan. We're out of time. Thanks to everyone for coming in. I'm really sorry. I think this discussion would just start right away, so I think we would get into really something good, but time is over. Thanks for my fellow panelists. Thank you also for joining us and staying with us for this session. I'm ending with a call on behalf of the Zero Project itself. So the currently call for nominations is out for inclusive education and ICT. So if you know about a practice or a policy that should get the limelight of the Zero Project, that should get an award and be presented at the Zero Project next conference, then there's still time until 2nd of July you're getting me out of my concentration. So feel free to check out zeroproject.org. You find all the details about the nomination. So and if you want to share a call, this is what Robin is pointing out. This is the hashtag you should use. It's hashtag ZeroCall24, and you find a lot also when you're using that hashtag. Thank you.